The galaxy was burning. For years, the Varkon swarm had torn through civilized space like a storm of teeth and claws. Entire star systems fell in weeks. Once proud fleets crumbled, their defenses shredded as if made of paper. Worlds that had stood for millennia were left smoking husks, stripped of life. The Galactic Council, guardians of order for thousands of years, had never faced an enemy like this. The Varkon did not negotiate. They did not retreat. They consumed. And now, with the swarm pushing closer to the Council's heartworlds, desperation spread like a plague. Every ally was summoned, every reserve fleet deployed. Yet still the tide moved against them. And so, in secret, the Council began to speak of the unthinkable. The edge of known space was a world marked on every star chart with a red circle. Earth, a planet labeled Red Zone, forbidden, dangerous. For centuries, the Council had agreed that no contact should ever be made. The reasoning was never spoken aloud in public halls, but in the quiet chambers of the Council it was whispered, Earth was too unstable, too violent. Its people had survived not in spite of conflict, but through it. A species that wove war into its very history. But now, desperation clouded judgment. It began with a single mission, a Council scout ship. Its hull scarred from battle, dropped into orbit above the blue-green world. The crew expected a backwater civilization, primitives with fragile tools and simple machines. Instead, they found something unsettling. The humans were everywhere. Their cities glowed like constellations, their ships climbed into the skies, their machines probed the void. And when the crew accessed Earth's historical transmissions, they fell into silence. Wars. Endless wars. From the first recorded stories to the present day, humans had fought each other with clubs, with iron, with fire, with machines that darkened skies. They had burned continents, rebuilt them, then burned them again. Empires rose and fell in centuries, sometimes decades. The crew watched ancient grainy footage of soldiers storming beaches under a rain of steel, pilots dueling above clouds, armies clashing in deserts, jungles, cities. They saw weapons capable of splitting the world apart, and leaders who had chosen to use them. The records were horrifying. And yet, there was something more the humans endured. Again and again they survived disasters that should have erased them. They rebuilt, adapted, advanced. Where other civilizations collapsed under far smaller trials, humanity seemed to thrive in catastrophe. They were not broken by conflict, they were sharpened by it. When the report reached the Council chambers, arguments broke out. Some shouted that the old warnings were true, that this was proof humans must remain isolated forever. Others leaned forward with desperate hope. "Do you not see?" they argued. "They are survivors, fighters, perhaps the only ones who can turn this war." In the end, desperation won. The Council approved limited recruitment. A delegation was sent to Earth, cloaked in secrecy. The plan was simple. Reveal the existence of the greater galaxy, explain the threat of the Varkon, and invite volunteers to join the Allied armies. No one truly expected humans to accept. Most species, when told of the swarm, recoiled in terror. But humanity's reaction was different. The first meeting took place in a quiet bunker far from public eyes. A hologram shimmered, showing the vastness of galactic space, the spreading shadow of the swarm. The alien envoy, tall and robed in silver, explained what was at stake. The war was already lost unless new strength could be found. When the envoy finished, silence hung in the room. The humans studied one another, then looked back at the projection of burning stars and broken worlds. And then someone smiled. Not the smile of relief, not amusement. It was something sharper. The humans asked questions. How many worlds had fallen? How did the enemy fight? What weapons did they use? Could they be killed? They leaned forward, hungry for details, not shying away from horror but analyzing it like a puzzle to be solved. One of the humans, a soldier with scars across his hands, finally spoke. His voice was calm, almost casual. "You need fighters. You've come to the right place." The envoy felt a chill despite the warmth of the chamber. For other species, war was a tragedy, an unwanted shadow. For these humans, war was familiar ground. Within days, volunteers stepped forward. They signed their names without hesitation, not for promises of glory or riches, but simply to test themselves against an enemy that claimed to be unstoppable. When the delegation reported back to the council, even the most hopeful could hardly believe it. Recruitment quotas had been filled faster than predicted. Training regimens were already being demanded by the humans themselves. Entire units were forming in record time. And when the humans were finally told about the swarm, their size, their ferocity, the billions they had devoured, there was no fear, there was excitement. The aliens who stood in the shadows of the training camps whispered uneasily. Other recruits trembled when shown hollows of the swarm. The humans only grinned, as if staring into the abyss was not a warning, but an invitation. The mistake was made. The council, blind with fear of defeat, had reached into the red zone. They had awakened a force they barely understood. And though no one yet realized it, the war had already shifted. The moment humanity was brought into the conflict, the galaxy's fate was no longer in balance. It was tilting rapidly toward something new, something unstoppable. And on the training fields of Earth, beneath the banners of 100 nations now united in a single cause, the humans laughed as they prepared. The sound was not cruel, but it carried a promise that the swarm would soon hear for themselves. The galaxy had always feared Earth for what it might unleash. Now it was too late. Humanity had been invited into the war, and the humans were eager. The ships came quietly in the night, their hulls glimmering with alien light as they carried the first human recruits into the stars. No grand farewell ceremonies, no crowds of cheering families. Everything was hidden under layers of secrecy. The Council did not wish the galaxy to know what they had done. Not yet. The humans were delivered to a barren moon at the edge of Allied territory, a place carved into a vast training ground. Here species from across the stars came to learn the art of war together. The moment the Terrans arrived, the others stopped what they were doing and stared. Humans looked fragile beside them. Compared to the tall-plated forms of the Valori, or the crystalline bodies of the Keelan, the Terrans seemed soft, made of flesh too easy to tear. Their eyes, though, unsettled the others. Unlike most recruits who looked nervous, the humans' gazes were sharp, alive, restless. They studied everything, the drills, the weapons, the alien officers barking orders. They were measuring, calculating. On the first day, the humans were given standard weapons. Pulse rifles, training blades, neural helmets for simulations. Most species required long hours just to grasp the basics. But the humans picked them up, as if they had been waiting for this their whole lives. They argued over grips, shared quick tricks, made improvements without being told. One officer, a four-armed veteran of the Council Guard, scoffed at them. Arrogant primitives. They think violence makes them special. He expected the humans to falter during the combat exercises. Instead, they surprised everyone. In the simulations, recruits were dropped into holographic battlefields against programmed swarm drones. The first wave was meant to test instincts. Most new soldiers panicked, hiding or firing wildly until instructors stepped in. But the humans moved differently. They spread out, covered each other, shouted short commands. It was messy, unrefined, but it worked. The holographic swarm fell under their reckless, coordinated assault. The instructors were unsettled. No one had ever done that on the first attempt, and it didn't stop there. Each day the training grew harsher. Extreme gravity runs, survival drills in toxic atmospheres, hand-to-hand sparring against species twice their size. Other recruits collapsed, begged for mercy or quit entirely. But the humans kept going, pushing themselves past every limit. When bones cracked, they bound them and fought on. When lungs burned, they spat blood and demanded more. What drives them? One alien whispered, watching a group of humans crawl through a mud pit under simulated bombardment. They act as if they have done this before. They had. The instructors began digging deeper into Earth's history, trying to understand. They saw the endless conflicts, the soldiers who marched through impossible odds, the explorers who braved oceans and skies with nothing but fragile ships. They saw entire cultures built around struggle and survival. For humans, hardship was not the exception. It was the rule. By the third week, word had spread across the moon. The Terrans weren't just surviving, they were excelling. Their strategies were unpredictable, their responses creative. In one exercise, when cut off from weapons, the humans tore apart environmental equipment and built crude bombs. In another, they feigned retreat, luring their opponents into an ambush. The other recruits began to avoid sparring against them. The humans fought too fiercely, too cleverly. Every match became a lesson in humiliation, yet among themselves the Terrans laughed. Not cruelly, but with a camaraderie that unsettled outsiders. Pain and exhaustion were jokes to them, badges of pride. One night, as the moons of the training world hung low, a council overseer watched a group of humans sit around a small fire, telling each other stories of Earth's battles. The human transports emerged from faster-than-light travel into a storm of fire. Before them stretched the shattered remains of an Allied fleet. Hulks of warships drifted in silence, torn open by claws and plasma. The colony world below burned, its cities swallowed in black smoke. The Varkon swarm was everywhere, a tide of living ships that pulsed with hunger. For many recruits, this would have been the moment of terror. For the humans, it was the moment they had been waiting for. Their commanders, alien veterans with centuries of experience, hurriedly briefed them. The Allied garrison on the surface was collapsing. If the colony fell, an entire sector would be lost. The task was simple: reinforce the defenses and hold as long as possible. Few believed survival was likely. The dropships screamed through atmosphere, metal shells glowing with heat. Inside, human soldiers sat in silence, weapons across their knees. Some tapped their helmets, others closed their eyes. And when the first tremors of enemy fire shook the hulls, a ripple of laughter passed among them. The hatch doors blew open. The humans poured out into chaos. The colony streets were filled with fire and bodies. Alien defenders struggled to hold barricades as towering Varkon creatures crashed through. The swarm was a nightmare of flesh and metal. Massive beasts with chitinous armor, swarms of smaller drones that poured over walls, flyers that rained acid from the skies. The Allied line was breaking, until the Terrans hit it. The first human squads moved like a storm. Their rifles spat fire, dropping drones with brutal efficiency. When the swarm surged forward, humans met them with blades and explosives. They fought not with hesitation but with fury, moving as if the battlefield was home. Alien soldiers, exhausted and beaten, stared in disbelief. The humans did not fall back. They advanced. A commander from the Valuri Guard shouted over comms, his voice trembling. "Who are these people? They fight like they have no fear." In truth, the humans did fear, but they had long ago learned how to turn fear into fuel. Every explosion, every scream only drove them harder. In one sector, a barricade was collapsing under a massive Varkon brute. The humans rushed in, hurling grenades, climbing onto the creature's back, stabbing through its armor until it crashed to the ground. When it fell, they cheered, rallying the defenders who moments before had been ready to surrender. Elsewhere, a squad found themselves cut off, surrounded by drones. Instead of retreating, they set fire to the buildings around them, turning the streets into a blazing trap. When alien officers saw the smoke, they thought the humans had been lost. Minutes later, the Terrans emerged through the flames, dragging captured enemy weapons and laughing at their escape. Hours passed. The swarm pressed harder, sending wave after wave, but the humans refused to break. They improvised constantly, turning rubble into cover, wreckage into weapons. Where alien tactics crumbled, human instinct thrived. At dusk, the enemy launched their final push. Dozens of beasts, thousands of drones, the sky black with flyers. The defenders looked to the humans, by now the heart of the line. The humans did not hesitate. They charged. The battle became madness. Hand to hand in the ruins, rifle fire flashing in the smoke, blades tearing through alien flesh. The humans shouted war cries in languages no one else understood, their voices cutting through the roar of the swarm. One by one, the massive beasts fell. The flyers scattered. The drones began to hesitate, and for the first time in living memory, the Varkon swarm retreated. The battlefield fell into silence. The smoke parted, revealing broken walls and blood-soaked streets. The defenders stood in stunned quiet, unable to believe what they had seen. In the aftermath, the alien commanders sent their reports to the council. The words were short but unforgettable. The Terrans held. The Terrans pushed them back. The news spread faster than light. Across the galaxy, whispers began. The humans had fought the swarm, and won. But not everyone celebrated. In the dark halls of the council, unease grew. If a species could break the swarm where others had failed, what else were they capable of? On the ruined colony, human soldiers sat among the rubble, cleaning weapons and patching wounds. They were bloodied, exhausted, scarred, but their eyes burned with the same fire as before. When asked how they felt after their first battle, one soldier grinned through blood-stained teeth. "Not bad," he said, "but I hope the next fight is harder." Galaxy had just witnessed the impossible, and the swarm had just learned a terrible truth. The humans were here. The reports reached the Council faster than any fleet could travel. Every world connected to the Allied networks. The same words echoed through command centers and military outposts. The Terrans held. The Terrans pushed them back. For centuries, the swarm had been unstoppable. Entire civilizations had been erased without resistance. Yet here, on a forgotten colony world, a species that had never before set foot in the galactic arena had accomplished the impossible. Humanity had broken the swarm's advance. At first, the galaxy reacted with disbelief. Hushed voices dismissed the story as exaggeration, propaganda to boost morale. But then came the evidence. Battlefield recordings, intercepted transmissions, eyewitness accounts. The images spread like wildfire. The recordings showed humans charging through fire, screaming war cries as they cut down beasts 3 times their size. They showed humans dragging comrades from the rubble, patching wounds under fire, rising again to fight. They showed the moment the swarm retreated, an image no one had ever seen before. The galaxy had no choice but to believe, and belief gave way to fear. On the merchant worlds, traders spoke nervously in cantinas. "They're not like us," one whispered. They looked at the swarm and smiled. In the universities, scholars dissected Earth's history, horrified by the endless catalogue of wars. "This is a species raised by violence," a professor said during a broadcast. "They have fought each other for millennia. What will they do to us when the war is over?" Even the allies who had begged for help began to question their decision. The Veluri Guard, who had fought alongside the humans on the colony, admitted the truth in private reports. "Without them, we would be ashes." But fighting beside them, it was like standing next to fire. Useful, yes, but dangerous. The council chambers grew tense. Some argued that humanity was salvation itself, the weapon needed to turn the tide. Others warned that once unleashed, such a weapon could not be controlled. "Today they fight the swarm," one elder councillor muttered. "Tomorrow they may decide to fight us." Yet there was no denying the results. As human units were deployed to other fronts, the pattern repeated. Where the swarm attacked, humans turned collapse into victory. Their tactics confused even seasoned commanders. They improvised constantly, turning battlefields into traps, using fear itself as a weapon. They broadcast false retreats, ambushed enemy hives, even hacked into swarm communications to spread chaos. It was working. Systems that had been written off as lost were being reclaimed. The unthinkable was happening. The swarm was bleeding. And everywhere the humans went, whispers followed them. Deathworlders, some called them, referencing the Council's ancient classification of Earth as too dangerous for contact. Madmen, others muttered, watching the recordings of soldiers laughing as they charged into impossible odds. Saviors, said the desperate, clutching at the hope that finally someone could stop the endless tide. The swarm, for their part, noticed as well. For the first time in their long, relentless conquest, they hesitated. Scouts reported the humans' presence with urgency. Hives shifted their strategies, targeting Terran units above all others. The Swarm Queen herself, an intelligence vast and cold, sent a simple directive across her fleets. Destroy the Terrans first. But killing them was not so easy. Each human death only seemed to harden the survivors. Each loss drove them to fight more viciously. Unlike other species who shattered when units were broken, humans adapted, reorganized, and struck back with even greater fury. On one broadcast intercepted by the Council, a captured swarm commander hissed to its queen before its execution, "They fight like the war is their natural state." Those words spread across the stars as quickly as the reports of victory. Back on Earth, governments that had once squabbled now poured resources into the war. Factories thundered, building ships and weapons at a pace that startled even the most advanced species. Millions volunteered, eager to step into the fire. The galaxy watched with growing unease. Humanity was not slowing. They were accelerating, spreading into the stars with the same relentless energy they once used against each other. In the shadowed halls of the Council, the debates grew darker. "We cannot control them," one voice warned. "If they defeat the swarm, what will they become? Conquerors, Dictators, gods. But another voice cut through, grim and resigned. It doesn't matter. The swarm will destroy us all unless we win. Humanity is the only chance we have left. Whatever comes after, we will face it then, and so the council gave their orders. Deploy the humans to the front lines. Give them everything they ask for. Let them fight. Across the galaxy, fleets prepared for war. Worlds braced themselves for the next assault. And somewhere in the depths of the swarm's hive, a new hunger burned. The Queen had seen the humans. She had felt the sting of their defiance, and she would not allow it to spread. The galaxy stood at the edge of something no one could predict. Hope and fear mixed in equal measure. The swarm expected brute force. For centuries they had swept across the stars with overwhelming numbers, devouring fleets and fortresses alike. Their enemies had always fought the same way, lines of ships, rigid formations, desperate defenses. And always the swarm consumed them. But the humans did not fight like the others. From the moment they entered the war, the Terrans began to change everything. They studied the swarm not with fear but with curiosity. They mapped their patterns, tested their reactions, and probed for weaknesses, as if dissecting a predator. Then slowly they began to fight on their own terms. The first sign of this came at the siege of Teleros. The swarm descended on the Teleros station, expecting another feast. They found human-led forces waiting. Instead of forming a single defensive line, the humans split into dozens of small strike teams. They vanished into the wreckage, reappearing like ghosts. They laid traps, detonated charges at choke points, and struck the swarm from behind before melting away again. The alien commanders were horrified. This was not a battle. It was a hunt. When the swarm finally broke off, leaving behind thousands of their dead, the defenders realized what they had witnessed: guerrilla warfare, perfected over millennia, on Earth's own killing fields. The doctrine spread quickly. Humans trained alien troops in ambushes, sabotage, and psychological warfare. They taught them how to weaponize deception, how to make the enemy see what wasn't there, how to force hesitation into a mind that had never known doubt. At the Battle of Calves Prime, humans broadcasted false transmissions, tricking the swarm into chasing phantom fleets, while the real strike force tore through undefended hives. At Iloran Belt, they mined asteroids and slingshot them into the path of advancing swarm carriers. The galaxy had never seen such methods. The humans also understood something no one else dared to consider. Fear. The swarm had always been the terror. Entire civilizations collapsed simply at the rumor of their approach. But the Terrans turned that fear around. They spread their own legend across the stars. They left survivors deliberately, letting the swarm carry tales of impossible resistance. They painted symbols on their armor, skulls and fangs and fire, designed not for themselves but for their enemies to see. Soon, the swarm began to hesitate. Scouts reported Terran presence and withdrew rather than engage. In intercepted transmissions, commanders urged caution. The predators of the galaxy were beginning to taste fear. For the first time, the swarm were not the hunters. They were the hunted. Yet this new doctrine unsettled the council almost as much as it terrified the swarm. The old ways of war were crumbling. Where once armies marched in orderly lines, now they scattered into shadows. Where once honor dictated rules of engagement, now deception reigned. Some called it brilliance, others called it madness. In one council session, a Keelan delegate slammed her crystalline hand against the table. "They are not fighting a war," she hissed. "They are teaching us how to be like them. How long before we forget what we are and become Terran?" But the victory spoke louder than fear. Whole sectors, long abandoned, were reclaimed. Colonies once doomed began to thrive again. And everywhere the humans went, they left behind new armies. Alien soldiers reshaped by Terran doctrine. Faster, sharper, deadlier than ever before. The Swarm Queen, vast and ancient, watched her fleets crumble. For centuries she had fed on weakness. Now she tasted something she had never known. Resistance. A cunning that mirrored her own. Her command was simple: crush the humans before their ways spread further. And so, she prepared a strike unlike any before, a blow aimed not at colonies or outposts but at the Terrans themselves. She would not allow this infection of tactics, this doctrine of chaos, to take root in the galaxy. Back on the front lines, a human commander reviewed intercepted transmissions. His scarred face remained calm as he read the Queen's order. He turned to his officers, all veterans of Earth's endless conflicts. Anne spoke with quiet certainty. She's coming for us. Good. That means she's scared. The humans smiled at the thought. For them, war had never been about numbers or tradition. It had always been about survival, about adapting, enduring, turning the impossible into victory. Now the galaxy itself was learning the lesson humanity had known for ages. War was not something to be feared. War was something to be mastered, and humanity was the master. The swarm struck without warning. For weeks, human-led fleets had torn through their hives, carving victory after victory from the jaws of annihilation. But the Swarm Queen had watched, adapting in silence. And when she moved with fury. It began at the Charon Rift, a stretch of broken space where gravity tore ships apart and navigators relied on instinct more than charts. The humans had chosen the rift as their staging ground, believing its chaos favored their unorthodox tactics. But the Queen saw opportunity. She unleashed her largest assault yet, an ocean of living ships, so many they blotted out the rift's fractured stars. The first Terran scouts never returned. The main fleet found itself surrounded before alarms could even sound. Inside the command carrier Resolute, human officers studied the incoming swarm. Thousands of signatures, maybe millions, converging. Even the most battle-hardened veterans went pale. This was no ordinary strike. This was extermination. The Council fleets that fought alongside humanity wavered. "It is too many," one alien admiral whispered. "No force can stand against that." But the human commander only leaned forward, eyes cold. "Then we don't stand. We fight." The battle began with fire and thunder. The swarm surged like a tidal wave, slamming into the human line with overwhelming force. Ships shattered, hulls burning as gravity ripped them apart. Drones poured through breaches, tearing defenders limb from limb. Allied formations broke instantly, scattering in panic. But the Terrans did not scatter. They turned the rift itself into a weapon. Human navigators danced their ships between gravitational fractures, slingshotting through debris fields at impossible speeds. Enemy fleets that pursued were torn apart by the rift's invisible claws. Saboteurs in cloaked corvettes cut through swarm supply veins, detonating charges inside brood carriers. Special forces boarded hive ships, planting nuclear warheads in their guts before fighting their way out with blades and fire. It was chaos, perfect, brutal chaos. The swarm pressed harder, throwing more bodies, more teeth, more acid into the storm. For every human ship destroyed, 3 swarm vessels followed it into the void. The battlefield burned so bright that distant colonies saw flashes in the night sky. And still, the Terrans did not yield on the ground. Where the swarm had forced landings onto fractured asteroids, human marines fought in tunnels and craters, ambushing their enemy in the dark. They rigged gravity wells with explosives, collapsing entire sections of terrain. Even as the rift itself tore soldiers into nothing. They fought on, fearless. Other allies could only watch. To them it seemed madness. No rational species fought so recklessly, throwing everything into the fire without hesitation. But this was no madness. This was doctrine. This was humanity, showing the galaxy what it meant to resist without surrender. For 3 days and nights the battle raged. The rift became a graveyard of ships, metal and flesh drifting side by side. Entire human divisions were wiped out. Names were spoken once and never again. But each sacrifice carved another wound into the swarm. At the height of the fighting, when it seemed the humans would finally collapse, the Resolute made its move. The commander had waited for this moment, luring the swarm into the rift's deepest fracture. With a single order, the humans triggered hidden mines, detonating warheads across the rift line. Gravity buckled. Space itself twisted. The trap consumed everything. Hundreds of swarm vessels were torn apart in an instant, ripped into the rift's endless abyss. The shockwave echoed across the void, shattering what remained of their advance. For the first time in history, the swarm did not merely retreat. They fled. When the silence finally came, the human fleet was broken, battered, half destroyed. Survivors drifted among wreckage, their ships bleeding sparks into the void. And yet, against all reason they had held, the Council received the news with disbelief. The Battle of Charon Rift would be remembered as one of the bloodiest in galactic memory, but also as the moment the tide began to turn. The galaxy now understood what the humans already knew. War was not won by numbers. War was won by will. On the bridge of the Resolute, the human commander looked out at the rift, at the graveyard of enemies and friends alike. His voice was hoarse but steady. "Let the galaxy remember this," he said. "We do not break, not here. Not anywhere." The message spread across the stars. Humanity had not just survived the Queen's strike, they had turned it into victory. And in that moment, the galaxy realized a truth it had been too afraid to speak. The swarm was not the only terror in the dark. The war ended not with silence, but with a roar. At first, no one believed it. Reports came from every frontier, swarm hives collapsing, brood fleets scattering, entire sectors going dark. The Queen had vanished. Without her will, the swarm turned feral, aimless, breaking apart under their own hunger. It should have been a victory that brought joy. Instead, the galaxy trembled, because where once they had feared the swarm, now they looked at humanity and feared something else. The council met in secret chambers, their words hushed, their eyes uneasy. "The humans did not just fight," one delegate whispered. "They consumed the war, they bent it into their shape, and now they know what they are capable of." Indeed, humanity had changed. The fleets that limped home from the Karen Rift were not the same as those that had first set sail. Soldiers bore scars, not only on their flesh but in their hearts. Commanders who had once been explorers now carried the weight of entire civilizations. And ordinary men and women, once content with a single blue planet, had seen the stars drenched in fire and found themselves unwilling to retreat to ignorance. Earth was no longer a red zone. It was the beating heart of resistance, the forge of survival, the species that had stared into extinction and refused to blink. When the Council sought to downplay humanity's role, the truth spread faster than lies. Survivors from dozens of worlds had fought beside Terrans. They carried stories home, of soldiers who charged when all others fled, of ships that used the void itself as a weapon, of commanders who smiled in the face of certain death. These tales grew, whispered in marketplaces and carved into monuments, and soon across the galaxy, 3 words echoed louder than law or decree. Call the humans, but with admiration came unease. Humanity had not only defeated the swarm, they had done so in ways that unsettled the Council. Nuclear fire, biological sabotage, psychological warfare, tactics no civilized race had dared to consider, yet which had proved devastatingly effective. The galaxy began to ask, if humans could do this to the swarm, what could they do to us? On Earth, the mood was different. Cities rebuilt, factories hummed, and fleets expanded. The war had awakened something ancient in their blood, something that had slumbered for centuries, but never truly died. For the first time in history, humanity looked outward not with fear but with ownership. The stars no longer belonged to others. They were contested ground, and Earth had earned its place among them. Yet even victory carried shadows. In the ruins of captured hives, human scientists uncovered truths about the swarm. They were not born killers. They had been made, engineered long ago by an unknown hand, abandoned, left to evolve into predators. Which raised a darker question. If the swarm was a weapon, who had built them? And where were their makers now? The Council urged humanity to destroy these findings, to bury them with the bodies of the fallen. But humans refused. They had learned too much about survival to ignore such mysteries. If someone had unleashed the swarm once, they could do so again. And next time the galaxy might not be ready. So the Terrans prepared. New academies rose across Earth and its colonies, where soldiers of every species came to learn the doctrine of total war. Fleets trained under human command, drilling in chaos, learning how to turn disaster into strategy. A single generation passed, and already the galaxy's militaries no longer resembled what they once were, and the humans, well, they smiled at the unease they inspired. Not out of cruelty, but out of understanding. Fear was a weapon, and if the galaxy feared them, then perhaps it would be strong enough to survive what was still to come. In the grand chambers of the Council, an ancient vote was cast. For the first time in history, humanity was offered a seat among them. Some called it madness, others necessity. In the end, it did not matter. The humans accepted. When the human ambassador rose to speak, silence fell across the chamber. He did not promise peace nor domination. He spoke only truth. We are not your saviors. We are not your destroyers. We are what the void demanded, resistance made flesh. If the darkness comes again, we will meet it. With you or without you, the galaxy listened. The galaxy remembered. And in that moment it became clear that the war had changed more than borders or fleets. It had changed destiny. For millennia, the stars had belonged to empires and councils, to species that believed they understood power. But now a new force stood among them, a force born of fire, sharpened by war and unafraid of the abyss. The humans had entered the war, and the galaxy would never be the same. Peace was a word no longer trusted. The swarm was broken, their queen gone, their hives scattered into drifting carcasses. But the galaxy did not rest. Every empire, every council, every colony carried the same thought, heavy as a storm on the horizon. If the swarm was created, then by whom? It was humanity who voiced the question openly, refusing to let silence hide the truth. Their scientists dissected hive cores, searching for answers buried in genetic codes and alien symbols etched into bone. Their fleets mapped ruins of forgotten battlefields, hunting for patterns. And slowly, uneasily, fragments began to emerge. The swarm had not been nature's accident. They were a weapon of conquest loosed ages ago. Their genetic code bore markers, signatures of hands not seen in millennia. And more frightening still, there were coordinates hidden in their DNA, not random, not broken. A map. The council panicked. They begged Earth to destroy the findings. "Leave the shadows buried," one elder pleaded. "We cannot survive another war," but humans had already survived. They had endured fire, famine, plague, and now the swarm. They did not fear what lay in the dark. They feared only being unprepared when it arrived, so they followed the trail. The fleet that set out from Sul was not merely Terran. Volunteers from dozens of liberated worlds joined them. Soldiers who had once doubted humanity now swore to fight under their command. For them, this was not exploration, it was a reckoning. What they found was worse than even humanity imagined. Beyond the known spiral arms, past dead suns and frozen seas, there lay ruins. Vast, silent constructs that dwarfed anything the Council had ever built. Machines the size of moons, hollowed worlds scarred by experiments. Here in this graveyard the swarm had been born, and here too they discovered signs of their makers. Not bodies, not ships, but marks. A language burned into steel. A design repeated again and again, a circle split by a line like an eye watching from eternity. It was not abandonment. It was not failure. The creators of the swarm had not vanished. They had simply moved on. The revelation shook even the fearless. If a civilization existed with power to forge the swarm, what else had they built? Were they still out there, perfecting new weapons, waiting to return? The Council urged retreat, but humanity pressed deeper. They uncovered records, fragments of thought encoded in crystal and light, enough to piece together a single terrible truth. The swarm had been only the first wave, a test, a probe sent into the galaxy to measure resistance. The test had lasted thousands of years, and now it was over. The creators would know the results. The fleet returned to Sol in silence, carrying their discovery like a burden. News spread slowly in whispers, until it became impossible to contain. The galaxy reacted with dread. Old rivalries reignited. Empires accused one another of hiding alliances with these unseen architects. Fear fractured fragile unity, but humanity stood firm. They had faced annihilation and endured. They would not cower from shadows. Instead, they called for preparation, not of a single world, but of all. Factories lit the night skies of Earth and Mars, forging fleets larger than any before. Shipyards in alien space adopted human designs, sleek and brutal, meant for adaptability in chaos. Training academies expanded into entire cities, where young recruits learned not only to fight, but to think like humans, to twist disaster into advantage, to turn fear into fire. The Council resisted at first. They feared that humanity was building an empire of war. But when their own citizens demanded the same training, when their soldiers marched under human banners, the Council had no choice but to accept. The galaxy was changing. Not into something ruled, but into something hardened. And yet, within humanity itself, voices argued. Some urged peace, claiming that preparing for shadows would summon them faster. Others, scarred by the war, whispered that the galaxy could not wait for its destroyers to return, that humans should strike first, find these creators, and end them before they could rise again. It was not unity. It was not harmony. But it was movement, and it was inevitable. In the quiet of space, far beyond the edge of maps, an ancient machine stirred. Its sensors blinked awake for the first time in ages. It recorded signals, the echo of Terran broadcasts, the pulse of human war drums, the rising heat of fleets prepared for battle. And somewhere across unfathomable distance, something listened. The war with the swarm had ended, but the true war had not yet begun, and this time, the galaxy would not be tested alone. This time, humanity would be ready.